Alrighty then, let's learn Greek together. Let's start with some vocabulary. We'll do that going forward. So we got some flashcards here. Strongly recommend that you go ahead and also make some flashcards of your own. So pause it as you need to. First word is akuo. Akuo. I hear. Blepo. I see. Ginosko. I know. Grapho. I write. Didasko. I teach. Fellow. I wish, will, or desire. Kai. And. Lego. I say, speak, or tell. Luo, which we're going to see a lot of. I loosen or destroy. Oop. Hoti, notice that rough breathing mark there. That or because. U, ook, and ook. Not. And finally, pisteuo. I believe. The negative u goes before the word that it's negating. Ook and ook are used before vowels or words that begin with vowels. Ook before one that's got a smooth breathing, and ook before one that has a rough breathing. Greek verbs share some characteristics with English verbs, but there are some additional qualities that it has that make for some different nuances without using as many words as in English. In order to read Greek well, we have to be able to kind of know the endings of some of the most common Greek verbs. Greek verbs each have three things: a tense, a voice, and a mood. The tense is about the time and the kind of action. The time of action could be past, present, or future. The kind of action can be either continuing or completed, meaning that it has a result, or simple, meaning that we affirm that there was something action that was being done regardless of whether it was completed or not. For example, continuing, I am reading a book. Completed, you have broken the window. And simple, she painted a picture. In English, the emphasis on tense is the time of action. In Greek, the emphasis of the tense is on the kind of action. And so Greek words have, number one, a tense. Secondly, they have a voice. The voice of the verb describes how the subject is related to the action. The subject might be performing the action, which would be an active voice, like we ate the bread. Or the subject might be acted on, which we call a passive voice, like the bread was eaten. In Greek, there's actually a third alternative called the middle voice. That's when the subject is performing an action that goes back to the subject, like I wash myself. So number one, we have the tense. Number two, we have the voice. Number three, we have the mood. The mood of the verb is how the action is regarded by the speaker. The action might be just asserted as a fact, which would be an indicative mood. It may be commanded, which would be an imperative mood. And it could be expressed as a hope, which is called an optative mood. The action might also be hypothetical or probable, given that other conditions are met, which would be called the subjunctive mood. In an inflected language like Greek, mood is expressed by changes in the verb. English indicates mood by adding auxiliary words like might or should or would. There are two other verb-related forms in the Greek, known as the infinitive and the participle, but those are they're better described as modes. Unlike the four forms that we just saw right now, the infinitive and the participle, they lack the characteristic of a person. Finally, Greek verbs, other than the participle and the infinitive, have a person, first person, second person, or third person, that is equal to I or we, you, he, she, it, or they, and it also has a number, singular or plural. Let's start with the present active indicative. The present active indicative of luo is given here on this flashcard. Luo is going to be used as an example throughout the book because it's short and it is entirely regular in its conjugation. So here in the first part we have our singular column. Luo, I loosen or am loosening. Lues, you loosen or are loosening. Lue, he, she, or it loosens or is loosening. Luomen, we loosen or are loosening. Luete, y'all loosen or are loosening. In luosi or luosin, they loosen or are loosening. Luo, lues, lue, luomen, luete, luosin. Here are some other basic observations about Greek verbs. A part of the verb remains the same, which is called the stem, in this case, lu, and the ending changes. To know which one is the stem, you pretty much just go to the first person singular and remove the omega. In this case, the stem is lu. Sometimes between the stem and the ending, there is a variable vowel that's placed there, either an omicron or an epsilon. Sometimes they're called connecting vowels or thematic vowels. In the form luomen, strictly speaking, the ending is men. But the ending is connected to the verb stem by the variable vowel omicron, thus luomen. Similarly, in the second person plural, strictly speaking, the ending is te, and the root is lu, and we have the variable vowel epsilon, and we have luete. We'll see why that's so important in later forms. Another thing we notice that's different about Greek verbs from English verbs is that there is a different form for every number-person combination. For example, first person singular, first person plural, and so on. What that means is that the subject is adequately described in the verb itself, unlike in English where you have to add words like I, or you, or he, she, or it. The Greek third person plural, however, does remain a bit ambiguous when it comes to gender. And so when we say we loosen, it is sufficient to say luomen. Generally speaking, in the Greek then, the pronoun is added only if there is emphasis on the subject. Thirdly, Greek, unlike English, has different forms for the second person singular than the second person plural. For example, in English we can say you to either refer to you as one person or you as a collective number of people. Notice in the third person plural we have here a nu, which is in parentheses, and that is called a movable nu. We're going to add that movable nu to either verbs that are followed by a punctuation mark or followed by a word that starts with a vowel. But that is not always the case. Wah, wah, wah. The purpose of this was to prevent what we call a hiatus. In other words, a word ending with a vowel and the next word beginning with a vowel and separating it with a consonant. For example, when we, in English, have the, that indefinite article or un. If it's a vowel, then we're going to start it with un, like an umbrella, not a umbrella. Again, this was not carried out consistently. Sometimes you will see luosin before a word that begins with a consonant. Also notice that the present tense does double duty in terms of action. It has both simple and continuing. For example, luo can mean either I loosen or I am loosening. So it's going to be all about the context to determine which one is more appropriate in that sentence. Next, let's talk about the present active infinitive. The present active infinitive is done by adding "-ane" to the end of the suffix. For example, luain, to loosen or destroy. We'll go into more detail about the present active infinitive later on the road, but for now, suffice it to say that if something ends with "-ane", it is to blank. And that does it for this episode of Crash Course in Greek. See you next time.